Good morning, gentlemen. Lovely that you could come out and hear a different story about a different place, a different time. So glad you could come. Okay, we got 1 minute of Charlie Panagoniac singing to some slides of people with dog sleds. So we just have 1 minute of soundtrack and you'll appreciate a little bit of the Eskimo language.
Palaming Africa 19 feet south in Lugo Kayu alaw si Magata Palawik Sani Tagwali awla ibong ata taga Isuya alaw si Mamad So kay mayo kalwakso ni Isulaw si Mayo Tagwala suila ka umanlog bakya Eri ano itikileto So kami yung nasapsyaso ni Tigod Pilaw si Mawati ko Ang masula ka umalo bakya Pagkataliti kilahebo Tagwali aswilangan ka o jawlat ko Aviano Palami Kayo ay lao sa man verli
We're talking about North Canada around this Hudson Bay. That's Hudson Bay there. And I was over there for 3 years working with the Inuit people. And my region, I was based in Churchill, which was in Manitoba down here. But my whole region went right up into the Arctic, over the Arctic Circle, Repulse Bay, right across this side of Hudson Bay, Belcher Islands, or Santa Kilowak Islands, they've got their own name for it. Excuse me. So yeah, a big country. Now here's the Hudson Bay in a larger scale, and Churchill's there. Now the shortest route to Europe from the next slide, from the prairies was through Hudson Bay. There's Hudson Bay there. Saskatchewan and Manitoba was the prairie area where they grew a lot of grain in Canada, and they wanted to get the grain to Europe, so they took it down to Winnipeg in Manitoba, and then they took it on a train up to Hudson Bay to Churchill. And from there they went through Hudson Bay in the summer only, when it's only water and not ice, for 6 weeks, and they took the wheat and the grain across to Europe, the shortest route possible. So you've got a bit of geography there, and the grain silo was built at the port of Churchill, was built in 1929. That's when they put the railway up from Manitoba, Winnipeg in Manitoba, took a railway to Churchill. So it was a major operation because of going over permafrost. Trying to get railway lines to settle on permafrost is very difficult. Trying to get electricity poles to stay upright in permafrost is difficult, so all the electricity poles were triangles. There were 3 poles so that they remained stable. Now, just to give you an idea of the size of the area that I was working in, there's Australia superimposed over the area that I work in. So the area was about as big as Queensland that I was responsible for. I was the superintendent of social development for the Inuit people around Hudson Bay. A massive area, all this area here, and across to Baker Lake inside here too. And it's an incredible place. The Churchill itself is renowned for the Prince of Wales fort in Churchill. This was built in 1717 and rebuilt in 1733. This big, massive, because the French and the English were fighting over the territory. This was a valuable territory because of the fur trade in the days. And the only reason they were trying to get in there was to get the furs that the Inuit people were bringing to them. The fox furs, which you see on the top of this coat in a minute, the polar bear furs and so forth, the seal furs. You can see from some of the artefacts up here that their footwear was made out of seal skin and caribou skin and all sorts of, they used the animal in every way they could. But the Hudson Bay Company went up there in the early 1700s and established their trading posts. And they really started the westernisation, if you like, of the Inuit people. And for a time, they had a shop in Churchill where this fort is. They changed the economy of the Inuit people. They would buy furs for food. You know, they'd sell them sugar and flour and things like that. And eventually it became such a problem for the diet of the Inuit people that the government had to stop this sort of trade because the Inuit people were suffering so much. We move on. Now, how did I get interested in Hudson Bay? Well, when I was in 1953, 9 years old, I started to look into the encyclopedia that my parents had bought, British Encyclopedia or something, and there was a picture of Henry Hudson abandoned by his crew in Hudson Bay, set adrift by mutineers on his ship with 7 Arctic workers, and they were never seen again. He was set adrift in this boat with his grandson, and because he was trying to find the Northwest Passage across through the Arctic to Europe, and they were pretty seriously mutineers, and they kicked them out, never seen again. They would have perished of cold and not able to find a way to survive. When the mutineers got back to London with the ship, they were all put in jail for mutineering. So there was a little bit of justice for the naughty boys. But anyhow, it started me off thinking about the Arctic and the life in the Arctic as a small boy. And I was working in Britain at the time, in Birmingham, in children's welfare, and I tell you what, it was a pretty dire time back in the 70s. And I applied for a job in Canada. I looked for jobs in Canada, and this job came up on Hudson Bay. And I thought, wow, that's my job. So I applied for it, and they sent a representative across to London to interview me, and I thought, this is pretty fancy. It was in the days of Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and they were splashing money around, and so they could do that. They could fly to London to interview someone to take on the job. So Pauline and myself and our 2 little girls, one was born in Adelaide, the other one was born in England, so we had one child in Adelaide, one in England. We then went on and flew in that DC-3 to Canada, and to this little, we arrived in the summer, there's not much snow around then, to this little tiny little community in Churchill, Manitoba, and we were given a job then to look after all the social work needs around Hudson Bay, which was amazing. When you look at the place in the winter, it sort of gets pretty cold. And while we were there, we went on and we had another little baby. So we had 3 girls all born in different countries. And if you think it's always cold up there, it's not, because here's me swimming when it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But the ice is still floating on the bay. I didn't swim for very long, by the way. And it did stop the...
And no more kids afterwards.
No more kids.
Ice in the water.
But we could take the children down to the beach, a pretty rocky beach, but we'd take them down to the beach at midnight because the sun never set in the summertime. In fact, that's an interesting concept. I don't know whether you experienced the midnight sun,
Yeah.
but if you haven't, when it comes up, it just pops its little nose above the horizon, but doesn't go over the sky like it does in Queensland and down over that side. It goes around the horizon until it gets over there. Amazing. You see the sun going around the horizon, never rises. That's at some points in the globe. When you get right over the Arctic Circle, you don't see it at all. You might see a shadow of it, but you won't see the sun at all. But there's lots of mozzies in the summer. My goodness, they come out of everywhere. So there's a lot of swamp, a lot of water, and the mozzies go crazy. Well, here's me and Dad and the oldest one and the second one before the third one arrived. And just a little break from my voice, that's a little harmonica there my daughter's holding, and I taught my kids harmonica when they were small. And one day we took them to Sydney, and in the centre of Sydney, my uncle had an office in Pitt Street, and I said to him, I'm going down to the Wynyard station to try a bit of busking with the kids. So we tootled off to the Wynyard station. I don't know whether you know Wynyard, but you go down a great big tunnel, all the thousands of people pour down this tunnel, then it divides. And at the division I thought, well, sit here kids and play the harmonica. So we did. I'll play you a tune. Tell you what happened after that, before the police came.
I was just going to say, why were you arrested?
We took the hat down, we stuck it in front of the children playing with their harmonicas, and the thousands of what they call them, passengers coming down to the train, they could hear the kids playing, and they threw money at us. We went back to my uncle's office with a hat totally full of coin. It was incredible. It paid for our whole trip. And we got out before the police. Right, let's carry on. So yeah, this is the third child we had in Canada. It's my beautiful wife, and the baby that we had in Churchill, we called her Heidi, because that was a pretty cold, wintry sort of name. And here we are in the summer, Dad with the three kids, can't hold them all at once, but there they were. It's great. And they got to meet lots of other little children, the local children. We had all nationalities, Japanese, German, Australian, Canadian, Inuit, and the Denny Indian people. There was a Denny tribe that lived down the road from us. So lots of nationalities. They played well, and they always rugged up in the winter. Happy kids, very multicultural. But the Mozzie's got a bit of a problem, so in one of my creative moves we got a few guys together and we built this play area for the children away from the mosquitoes, so they could go in there and not get bitten and eaten alive. In the communities, whenever a plane arrived, there's no roads anywhere. You either flew somewhere, or you went by boat, or you went on the train, but there was no roads. So every time a plane arrived in an Eskimo community, everybody came out to see who was on it, who's coming home, who's got a parcel. And so here's some of the kids out at the airport. Come on. Here's the Twin Otter arriving in Eskimo Point, and as usual the whole town comes out to see who's coming in. Some of the airstrips on these little communities are pretty small and rocky and dangerous, but no major plane crashes occurred while we were there. But in the summertime you do get some autumn leaves, and they're very low to the ground. In the tundra, amongst the rocks, you'll find these beautiful colours, and also, but you've got to keep looking out for these blokes. Here they are. Beware out there, there's a hungry bear. And you've got to keep your eyes open at all times, because before the ice freezes on the bay, the polar bears were down south. They go south into the woodlands where the trees are, and they build their dens where they have their cubs, and then they wander back before, in the autumn, before the winter really sets in. They wander back waiting for the sea ice to freeze over, because once the sea ice freezes over, then they go out over the sea ice to hunt for seals and fish and all those sorts of things. But in the meantime they hang around Churchill. It seems to be the popular place to hang around, because we had, and back 50 years ago we're talking, we had a dump like we had in Australia 50 years ago, where everybody just dumped their rubbish. There wasn't any such thing as recycling. So can you imagine all the fuel drums that were dumped at the dump, but then all the food was dumped in. So the polar bears, that's why this one's looking very dirty, he's just come out of the dump. They would also come to the houses, and in fact they have been known to smash a window because they could smell something cooking in there. Mind you, the window they smashed was only a small one, they couldn't get in there. But yeah, it was an exciting time. Polar bears were often taken away because they would become nuisances. They broke into the Hudson Bay store one year and went straight for the cornflakes. So when the manager came in, there was cornflakes all over the shop. So when they just actually worked out who was the culprit, they would then tranquilise them, or they trapped them in a round, it was like a corrugated iron water tank, a small tunnel one with a trapdoor on the end, and they'd put some nice meat in there or something, and they'd go in and they'd be trapped. Then they would fly them south about 300 or 400 kilometres away, but they just thought it was a holiday because they were back in a week. They enjoyed that. Occasionally, when they really become delinquent, they were executed, and the RC, Royal Canadian Mounted Police would shoot them. And then they would ask an Eskimo brother to skin them, and then they put the skin up for auction and someone would buy it. Now, in the winter time, when it's freezing, you want to keep the dead bear warm, so that the Inuit man with the sharp knife, that's a skinning knife. They get in behind the fur and they go down and take it off like that. So when the police killed the bears, they dumped them somewhere that was air conditioned, and that happened to be my garage. So I came home one day to pull up the door of the garage. Oh, 2 dead bears in the garage. And I said, how long's that going to go? Oh, until they get the skins off them. So then they get the Inuit guys to come and skin them.
Weren't you worried about all the blood?
No, when you're skinning something, they don't bleed.
They don't bleed?
No, they don't bleed. So I didn't have any blood problem. But I've tried polar bear to eat. No, too gamey, very rich and gamey. I've tried whale, blubber. Oh, too oily. You know, I don't think I could survive on a diet that the Inuit people survive on. Moving on, this is a summer camp. In the summertime, the Inuit people go out to camp in the bush, if you like. There's no bush, but they go out to camp on the tundra. And a lot of the Inuit would follow the caribou wherever they could in the inland when they're not on the coast. On the coast, the coastal Inuit would use fish and seals as their main diet, but the inland one would follow the caribou. Now, 1953, about the same, that's when there was a major change in Inuit life. Because in 1953, there was a Chinook. A Chinook is a hot south wind coming up from the south, over America, over Texas, a really hot breeze. And it comes into the Arctic and melts the snow. You might have 5 feet of snow, and suddenly it's melted down to 3 or 4 inches, and then there's a cold wind come in and froze what's left, and so it became like ice. There was an ice cap over the Arctic, and the caribou couldn't crack through the ice to feed. So the caribou herds were starting to die. The Inuit that were following were starting to get sick and die, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police up there in 1953 sent a telex or over and out message to Ottawa. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? The Inuit are dying. And Ottawa, in their wisdom, said, bring them into settlements. So 1953, nomadic Inuits around Hudson Bay were invited to come and live in little boxes, tiny little dongas really, and moved into community. And there was usually just a Mountie, and maybe if they were lucky they had a priest who'd set up a station there. Some of the early white contacts they had included whalers. The whaling ships used to go into Hudson Bay and look for whales. The beluga whale was a very common one, and the whalers would boil them down for oil. But unfortunately the whalers also liked the girls, and they caused a lot of problems with the girls. And in one little community called Eskimo Point, they had to put a sign on the runway that said, this is the world capital for VD, the VD capital of the world, so as to warn any males coming into the town to behave yourself. And it slowed down a bit. But yeah, in the times that we were there, anyone who was having a baby, they had to leave town. They had to be flown out to Churchill. Well, there was a hospital in Churchill, a small hospital, where my daughter was born. But I also was responsible for running a hostel where the Eskimo women would come and wait for their baby to be delivered. So we had about 10 or 20 ladies camping there, most times waiting for their babies. But they were a long time away from their family. However, let's look on. There's some more kids in this next picture. This is called the spring clean. After the snow's all melted and gone, it's clean up time because there's always a lot of rubbish dumped in the snow. And you think it's going to disappear after the next snowfall. Well, in the summertime, it suddenly appears again and you get all this rubbish everywhere. So here's one very keen volunteer taking all the kids on an emu walk, picking up the rubbish. Amazing, amazing times. That's why you don't eat yellow snow, by the way. Here am I talking to Tonga Leki. He owned a dog sled and he took me out riding on his dog sled. I didn't have a lot of local language, but I had enough to get by. I knew how to say to the ladies in the hostels, "Aniak bing mung now yimavik." Do you want to go to hospital? I had to learn that because I was called out at 2 o'clock in the morning to come down and see the ladies who were in labour. Yeah, this one is safe because its mum died and the baby died, and they sent it off to a taxidermist to keep a souvenir. But he didn't buy that one. Now you've heard of the Northern Lights. How many have seen Northern Lights? Northern Lights, there's a couple. It's great. They're an amazing phenomenon. They sort of crackle. You can hear the crackling in the sky. But they change colours. Amazing phenomenon.
How long do they go on for?
Oh, it might be an hour or 2 hours, it depends.
And night after night, or just one night?
They can go night after night, depending on climatic conditions. Things change up there in the atmosphere. They can go for a week, but you know, might not only see one every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Oh, the lights have been in tonight. They're lovely.
Crackle.
What's that?
Why do they crackle?
I don't know. Some static noise in the atmosphere. Beautiful. And it's very hard to get a decent photograph of them. My photographs are ancient, you know, 50 years old, and I didn't have the sort of equipment to get good photos, but they are an amazing thing. I've also seen the Aurora Australis. They do have the auroras in Australia on very rare occasions. Very rare. Have you seen the Australis? Anyone seen those? You've got to live down in Tasmania, I think.
They were visible in Victoria.
Victoria?
Recently.
I've
and
seen-
even into
I've seen them in South Australia, yeah. You've got to go south. But what is it like in winter in the middle of the day? That's our house in the winter. And it's a different world. Totally, when we landed in Churchill, we thought we were on the planet. It was so different, but very exciting. I loved it, I loved it. A little bit more than my wife loved it. And if you get a leak in your tank, don't worry about the water getting to the ground, it won't. It hangs up there. We had a leak in the tank there. Now this is a butcher shop on sled. Now they go out with their skidoos and they tow these sleds and they shoot the caribou and skin them while they're warm and leave them on the caribou and drive back to town. Then they'll share it with anyone in the community. They're very community oriented. And they're more friendly than you blokes with your barbecue because they share with everybody.
What did it taste like?
Caribou is nice, yeah, caribou is good. It's a bit like cross between lamb and, I don't know, goat, I suppose. Yeah, I didn't mind caribou. This next slide tells you about the sewerage system.
I've said that.
This is called the honey bucket.
No, it's not.
And we were blessed one year to have a week's holiday away from the kids. A lady said, "You need a break." She said, "Why don't I look after your children and you take your wife and go up to Eskimo Point, and there's a cabin up there that you can stay in." The cabin is one of these dongers that were first put up there, a tiny little cabin, and it had a tiny little toilet, and this is the toilet. And every time it got full, you'd tie a knot in a plastic bag and stick it out on the step at the door, and the council man would come along in the bombardier and he'd pick it up and put it on a little trailer and he'd drive it out to sea. And he'd throw all the bags out on the ice, the sea ice. Well, come summertime, these black plastic bags go into action and they blow up. They get nice and warm with the sun on the black plastic and they blow up, and then they float ashore because the ice is all melted. And then along comes the children. And they want to be like their dad. Okay. So they're going to learn how to use spears. This is not a spear, it's a harpoon. So along come the children, and all the black bag, hop, and the poo goes into the ocean. Oh, I tell you, the environmentalists would have had a fit. Oh, this story here. Winnie Poochuk came to visit me one day in the office. She had a nomadic childhood. She was living out there where they were doing this fishing. And she was playing in the creek where the fish were. And you know what kids do? They pick up things pick up the little rocks, and she put it in her mouth. She put one of these little rocks in her mouth and it stuck. And she's only little, and then she's unconscious, going blue, and her brother rushes over to get Dad. Dad pulls her out of the water and rushes her to her mother, and then he gets the knife, cut his daughter's throat, pulled the rock out. Then he hands the daughter to his wife, who she pulls out a bone needle from the leg of a caribou with sinew sews up her daughter's throat. She got a scar of about 5 inches along there. She was embarrassed. She didn't want to show it on the camera, but that's the girl, Winnie Kutu. And now she's a mature woman, of course. But they had no medical services. They had to survive their own way. He knew anatomy because he cut so many caribou up. He knew the anatomy not to cut the jugular vein. He managed to get that rock out of her throat, and Mum sewed it up. I tell you, it is so amazing to come face to face with people living in antiquity, really. They've been like that for 4,000 years. The bone needle, can you imagine that? And tiny bits of sinew to sew up your daughter's throat. Wow, that impacted me, I tell you.
No anaesthetics.
No anaesthetics.
No infection.
And what were those silver birds? The big silver birds flying over there. They were aeroplanes going to war. Tin wheel, aeroplanes. And because they flew over the Arctic, it was the shortest route from Canada or America to Europe during the war. So there were lots of these timber. And of course the Inuit on the ground thought they were big birds. Nice big silver birds, I would love to catch one. But, as a matter of fact, I had an interpreter, Inuit interpreter. He's still alive, Peter Atinua. He eventually, after he worked with me and a few other people, he eventually went into politics in Ottawa. And he got on to their Senate or wherever it was. And he said, I'm the only Canadian politician that speaks with an Australian accent. He learned too much from me. Yeah, Peter Atinua. Okay, let's move on. Polar bears. Yes, always polar bears. They make a good story. Polar bears. Yeah. I told you we had them on the roof. You know, they'd climb up over the buildings and you could hear them at night. We'd be lying in bed at night and I'd say to Pauline, hey, there's a bear on the roof. So, I didn't have a gun. I didn't want a gun, but I didn't have one. So I got a bucket of rocks and left it at the laundry door. Because we had dogs, we had a Saint Bernard, and we'd feed the dog outside, and the polar bear would come often to see if the dog left any food in the plate. And every time I saw the bear at the back door, I'd grab a rock out of the bucket, open the door and shout like mad and throw the rock at the bear, and it just sort of flinched. Didn't give a damn about my little rock. But yeah, it was a constant threat to us when they were in. What else did I do in the Arctic? Well, I was responsible for alcohol education. Now, some of you blokes are experts in this. But, you know, they didn't know a thing about it. They had not one clue about alcohol. I mean, they pour up a glass like that of whiskey and drink a lot. And the next thing they're flat on their back in the snow somewhere. So we decided that we would teach them what it was really on about. So if you're going to drink it all, then go gentle. You have small glasses for whiskey. You don't have big glasses. We'll have a sip right now. It's not gin. Thank you. Are you guys learning things?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so we set up these conferences for local people. We've got the local Mountie there, sitting there with one of my staff. She's an interpreter. We've got the leaders in the community that come so they can teach their people. And so we set fire to whiskey and the spirits to show them how powerful it was. And if you put too much of that in your body, you're going to get really drunk quickly.
Catch all that, don't smoke.
Yeah, that's right. They all smoked. They all smoked and whoop. So yeah, and then we put on functions. We had square dancing. The Scots were very good at teaching
the Inuit had a dance with 10 accordions, and they'd get the old accordion going, and they'd be doing square dances. They loved it. So we put on a dance, and then we gave them 6 tickets for alcohol, and then we put on some light beers, etc. But they could not have more than 1 beer half an hour. So we had a little timer on a stamp. So you've got to come back in a half an hour. So we made them drink slowly and also eat food with it. If you eat with your drinking, you're not going to get drunk and out of control. So that's what we did. We went to every community. I was in charge of 8 communities for their education. And then the white fellas wanted to open a pub in the biggest town, Rankin Inlet. There was a bloke there running a hostel, and he was making a fortune out of government people coming to stay the night in his motel. And he put in an application. You had to have a plebiscite before you could open a pub. So this guy put his application into the liquor board to open a pub in Rankin Inlet. So I said, well, we're going to have an alcohol education program just before the plebiscite so that people know what they're doing. So I said, well, what's a good idea? I think there's a movie called The Days of Wine and Roses with Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick. Anyone know? It's a powerful movie about what happens if you drink too much. So anyhow, no one had TV. It came while we were there. The satellite went into the sky, they called it Big Brother, and we were there the day that television was beamed into the Arctic. And none of the kids went to school for 2 weeks. They stayed home watching that telly. So anyhow, there wasn't telly at the time of this plebiscite. We said there's going to be a movie in the bug house, or whatever they call it, the community hall. So they came to watch the movie, and at the end of the movie, a lot of the women were crying. I got up there with my interpreter. I said, all right, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow is a big day, and they're going to have a vote back here at the community hall whether you want alcohol available all the time in your community. And the women came out in droves and said no, they didn't want it. So they still don't have a pub in Rankin Inlet. For those of you wondering how you're going to get on, you could still order in your liquor from the south, and it would come on the plane, and you wait till the plane arrives and you get your own supply. So you could still get grog, but there was not going to be an open tap, no open tap for the locals to get addicted. And there was scientific proof to show that the Inuit, genetics, are more prone to alcohol addiction than the white genetics. So they were at risk of suffering. And we had other community meetings to talk about various things. One of their customs was that you always give away your first baby.
What?
To your mother-in-law.
That's all right.
Your first baby belongs to your mother-in-law. So she then has a job to do. She has a purpose. So grandma brings the first child up as her own. And that had a few complications for a few people, but they accepted that. We'll have a baby, give it to mum. So there were a few other issues around child care and so forth. So we were constantly trying to educate them how to look after kids, make sure they go to school. Things they had similar problems here with some of their local Indigenous people. Fascinating stuff. But when you want to play your sport, you get out on the street with your hockey stick and you play it in the street. Ice hockey down in the street. And what do you do if you fly a chartered aircraft into the Arctic on a frosty day? Your motor will freeze up for sure, and you won't be able to start it. So you've got to go out to the plane at least an hour, maybe 2 hours before you want to take off. And you put the canvas tent over the motors, and then you have the great big gas burners on the motor to thaw them out before you can take off. Different world if you're an engineer or a pilot, it's a very different world.